Thank you everyone for joining our webinar today. This is a part 3 of our series of webinars that we've been doing on the various phases or areas within automation. Today, I am Ahmed Zaidi, the Chief Automation Officer and CEO here at Accelirate. It's an honor to be hosting our partner, UiPath, Vikram Parolkar, representing our partner UiPath, which is the leading vendor for RPA software in the world, as well as Robert Booth, who's Director of Process Discovery here at Accelirate. Today we'll be talking about the different types of robots, how they're used. You'll be seeing some cool things. So I'm excited to welcome you all to our webinar. With that, I will, Robert, if you could give a quick introduction of yourself, and Vikram as well, that would be great. And then Robert, you can take that away.
Sure. Thank you, Ahmed. So hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Robert Booth. I'm a Director of Process Discovery here at Accelirate. So one of my main focuses is really in understanding, well, how does the business function, the major transactions, and where to identify value and opportunities for automation and transformation.
Hey guys, my name is Vikram Parolkar. I'm a senior sales engineer with UiPath. I work in the pre-sales organization aligned with several of our key accounts. I'm based out of Dallas, Texas, and been with UiPath for about 3 years now, so quite some time. Previously, before that, I was working for Accenture, an implementation partner, right? So I'm very familiar with that process, but today I think we're going to be talking specifically about our different robots and our different automation scenarios.
All right, thanks, Vikram. So just to give a brief, primer in terms of RPA, again, I don't know how familiar everybody is with the technology on the phone, so a brief introduction is that UiPath robots emulate people. And they have here see, think, and do, where we are reading the screen through AI and computer vision of pulling that data. You can think through AI and machine learning and deciding what to do. And then you actually do the actions with RPA. So when you're thinking about RPA, it's really about what is the actual work being done. And the robots are the ones actually doing the work. So the UiPath platform here, we're going to be getting into a lot of that in terms of how these robots, what are the main different types, what are some characteristics of the different types of robots that you would utilize. So I wanted to give a brief introduction of what this RPA is and how we're really approaching it for this meeting. And as we mentioned before, this is part of a larger webinar series called the 5 Phases of Automation. So this particular webinar is about the run phase of automation. And you'll see where we're talking about run, that's the doing part of these overall phases of automation, where we're talking about the robots themselves that are doing the work, how to identify those opportunities where you can utilize these different types of robots, and kind of identifying and hallmarking some of the key traits of each. So given that, I'm going to go into the section of the different kinds of automation solutions. So giving a high level primer of what are the main different types of robots, how we incorporate our methodology to identify opportunities where different robots will be able to be utilized. So when we're talking about integrating technology in our methodology, we utilize a tool like Automation Hub when we're first starting our discovery to really establish the overall structure of the organization. Depending on what your scope is, if you're rather full enterprise or just starting at one single department, you need to make sure you have the structure understood. So before anything, we go into what we call function analysis, where we're understanding the different work groups and the structure of them and the flow of work. And we identify the key focus areas that make up the enterprise or that are in scope for our discovery. And it is through these key focus areas that we iteratively go through a process of role and task analysis. Now, role analysis, what our main goal here is first identifying the key roles that are going to be relevant for our discovery. And we conduct the role and task analysis on those roles iteratively. So we're looking for each role to identify what are the main core tasks being performed so that we can then perform task analysis on each of those core tasks. And we leverage a tool like task mining a lot in this phase of our methodology because we're able to, through function analysis, identify, well, what are the main roles that make up this key focus area, because that's where the work is being performed. But we're also able to leverage a tool like task mining to help us scale the amount of work that we're able to capture and then effectively analyze for opportunities. So you should see that role and task analysis are very much intertwined, because we're analyzing the roles themselves and the main tasks they're doing. And then for each of those main tasks, we are then going into task analysis. All throughout this time, we are looking and analyzing any opportunities for automation that may come about. And all of those opportunities are logged in our dashboards, as well as in a tool like Automation Hub. So you have a very updated view of what your pipeline looks like. And when we're talking about, well, integrating this technology into our methodology, the opportunity analysis is that final main part where we are actually looking for, well, what are the potential opportunities for automation? And that's where bots come in, because the bots will end up being the workers, so to speak, that are doing that work. So it's important to understand when we're talking about opportunity analysis that we have to make sure we put that in the perspective of the automation first mindset. And the reasoning why is because when you are delivering value, you want to make sure you're delivering value to more than just your particular area of the business. You should, if you're wanting to go enterprise and you have a true automation first mindset, you want to be looking at that transaction level. And let me tell you what that means. If you were to break up an enterprise, they're going to be normally, as a standard enterprise, will be made up of key focus areas. Think your finance, think operations, think HR. And those key focus areas, depending on the size of them, may have one or multiple departments within them. In finance, think accounting or accounts payable. Within those departments will maybe be made up of functions. Maybe it's in accounts payable, it's one particular function where we're handling a certain customer. This is how you would normally structure if you're going from a top-down approach. And that's kind of how we traditionally used to look for opportunities. We'd say, okay, well, what is the key focus area that we feel will have the most amount of value? And we start there. But if you start looking at the actual work being performed in these areas and how they work with one another, you'll find that there's going to be a couple of key transactions that may go outside the traditional scope of just your key focus area. And to give you an example of that, if you're talking about let's say, procure to pay process, that's probably going to live within a couple of different key focus areas like operations, finance, and you'll see that the transactions, where they start and where they end, they very rarely, especially when they're large transactions like that, live within the same key focus area. Now, some of them may just stay within the same particular key focus area and go through a stream of departments and functions. But depending on how those transactions flow, which we are standardizing in our methodology, you will have different types of robots that could better be suited to those transactions and deliver that enterprise value. And that's what we're going to be getting into next, is kind of saying, all right, well, we're talking about robots, but what are the types of automations? And I wanted to first showcase to you that when you're looking at an enterprise and you're looking at that transaction level, you'll find that the transactions, they live usually within or across multiple key focus areas. And when you are trying to find opportunities, you want to make sure you have that context in mind and you're able to apply the right solutions to be able to best handle that transaction. So next, going into, well, what are the different types of robots or bots? Now, to simplify it, we really have three tranches. Now, we have the unattended, the attended, and the hybrid. Everybody's usually heard of the unattended and attended. Hybrid is another one. These are really your three main types of bots. Now, there's what I guess you can call bot types or deployment types that UiPath has coined some of these. You may have heard fully or partially unattended or human in the loop. You may have heard in tandem or interval attended automations, or you just have hybrid deployment. These are all types of unattended, hybrid, or attended automations. And oftentimes there's a lot of overlap. So you don't have to kind of get lost in the weeds a bit. Just the thought process here is that whenever you're talking about bots, know that they will live within one of these three tranches. And as time goes on, you will start to see more and more hybrid deployments becoming more commonplace as you're getting more of these end-to-end transactions automated. So I'm going to go into each of these main types as well as the deployment types here, and then I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Vikram. So we're talking about unattended automation. There's these three main types that we have listed. You have your fully unattended, partially unattended, and then your human in the loop. Now, fully unattended are what they sound like. Human intervention is not required. It's normal. It's only ever done on exceptions. This is excellent for repetitive transfers of data between systems where it's just straight through processing. You don't need to have anybody involved. And this is a very scalable type of automation. Because it requires no human input whatsoever, you'll be able to apply these, you'll be able to scale these up or down depending upon volume. Fully unattended automations are very common in the back office type processes, just so you're all aware. Now, in terms of partially unattended, this really depends between partially unattended and human in the loop. There's a very slight distinction, but partially unattended is there's an initial human input, and then the bot will take over. And this is used for processes that are usually very time consuming or laborious after initial prep work. And because the human input is it's minimized now, because we're handing it off for the bot to be able to do some of these actions, we're able to increase that capacity. And they're able to move on to tasks that help drive more value for the business. Now, the difference between this for human in the loop is that there are multiple, in human in the loop, there are multiple instances where validations or input will be required. This can address obviously highly complex processes or workflows where it's a very long transaction. Think something in originations, for example, where you may need multiple different handoffs. Human in the loop automations are very commonplace for more complex processes. And your goal really is to minimize the amount of handoffs that are necessary. And through utilizing a tool like Action Center, we're really able to really leverage how much we're able to scope into our automations. And over time, we can integrate with AI or OCR, intelligent processing, and so on, to be able to gradually reduce the need for human validation. So these are going to be your three types of unattended automations. You'll see here at the bottom that obviously fully unattended, you'll see that the work stream, the bot is handling it completely. Only the human is using it for certain exceptions. Now, for partially unattended, you'll see that there's really one handoff to the bot and then given back to the human for a review. Whereas in human in the loop, there are multiple handoff points. Those are the main distinctions between these three. Now, going into attended automation, there's really two main types. You have your interval and your in tandem attended automations. So in your interval, upon activation, the bot will take over the user's computer and it completes a series of mechanical steps. This is usually for shorter manual processes that could be automated across entire functions, because it's something that is done across different functions. Even though they may be different work, you'll be able to scale that value. Think about concepts of, oh, I need to pull this data from this system. Whether I am a call center agent or I am a loan processor, I still need to pull this data from this particular area. If I leverage an interval attended automation to have that, I'd be able to leverage that value regardless of where I am in the business. And then you have your in tandem. And this is where, just as it sounds, they're executing the processes while the user is working on the machine. So one of the main distinctions between interval and in tandem, these are used commonly in tandem for contact centers, where there's a lot of different systems of data that need to be referenced or pulled or extrapolated. In tandem, attended automations are a very large use case for that. The whole point of this is really for reducing average handling time. So again, AHT is one of the main metrics that you're going to use for call center. And this helps increase capacity for the user or the agent to be able to focus on the customer. So if you're looking at the workflow of these, with an interval, you'll see that it's triggered. The human triggers it with, this particular example is a hotkey. That triggers the automation where a bot is pulling all that relevant data, aggregating it, passing it back to the person to verify. Upon verification, they press another hotkey to finish out that process. Whereas in tandem, you'll see that they obviously work hand in hand, where a customer receives a call. At that point, a bot will be able to pull up a profile of that particular caller's details, name, address, whatever the particular function is. While the user is talking with the customer, the bot will be aggregating and manipulating that data and passing that data back to the user for their own reference, so they'd be able to better handle the call. The main distinctions here is that in tandem is obviously mostly meant for contact center type use cases, as they're happening while you are talking on the phone with somebody. And then your last is your hybrid. And as I mentioned before, hybrid automations are becoming more and more commonplace. And really the definition that UiPath provided and that we feel best describes hybrid automation or hybrid deployment is you're chaining together attended and unattended automation elements. And this allows you for automations that have impact on the end-to-end process level. So the attended bots both can trigger and hand off data to unattended bots for back-end processing, whilst it also can be used to bridge the gap between customer-facing processes and back-office processes that are required to support those interactions. And this helps provide greater visibility into key business processes to build enterprise automations, making these processes more robust. So in this workflow, in this particular example, the user triggers an attended automation with a hotkey. So that attended bot is monitoring for certain actions and gathering data. Once it gathers a certain amount of data, it can then pass that off to an independent robot for them to do the end process. These types of automations are becoming more and more common as we are getting to more and more complex use cases. If you're talking about, I'm first starting off a COE, normally hybrid automations will not be the ones that you would find first. Your low-hanging fruit processes are normally going to be, fully or partially unattended type automations. Those are the ones you're going to want to go through first. It's the longer term value type automations where you're going to be leveraging hybrid automation. And it's definitely something that you will need to leverage as you scale your COE, because you will have less and less of those low-hanging fruit automations as they are already being dealt with by attended or unattended automations. So I wanted to provide that insight into, well, how does our methodology work for discovery in terms of finding these opportunities? Where are we looking at these opportunities and how within an enterprise, and how do these bots fit within them? And then defining at a high level what these different bot types are between hybrid, unattended, and attended, and the different deployment types. So I'm going to hand this over to Vikram, who's going to be going into, well, how do I know where to start? So take it away, Vikram.
Awesome, sounds good.
And let me stop sharing my screen. Okay, you should be able to share your screen now.
Awesome. So how do I know where to start? Typically, the first step is really understand what are our roles and responsibilities within an organization. With UiPath and our platform approach, we really want everyone at an organization to touch automation at some point. And you're going to have these different personas that we see here. The first is going to be the automation user. An automation user is someone who consumes automations, gets value from them. They're typically sitting within the business. They could also sit within IT if you're doing IT automation. It's just someone, again, who's getting value. And so these employees, they're the ones raising their hand and saying, hey, I have an automation idea. But they're also going to be engaging both with unattended robots as well as attended robots. For unattended robots, we have something called Action Center, which allows them to have unattended robots pause their workflow and ask humans for help, basically bringing humans in the loop. And so those are going to be some of those unattended scenarios where the human, again, entered, or there was handoff from the unattended robot to the human user. The second type of robot is going to be attended, right? And so automation users can engage with those attended automations via UiPath Assistant. That's where they're going to launch, and I'll be showing both of these live, but UiPath Assistant is going to be a user interface where you can actually launch attended automations that will run on your machine. And you're going to be, again, able to engage with those automations. Either robots can pause and wait for trigger events like keystrokes or mouse clicks on specific UI elements. They can pause and present a message box to the user. They can pause and present a dialogue or unique form to the user. But again, all of it's launched from the assistant to begin that automation. The second persona is going to be the citizen developer. And so the citizen developer is someone who, they get value from automations, but they really want to start building automations for themselves. And we classify these people as tech savvy employees, but ultimately they're not developing automations for the entire organization. They're developing automations just for themselves. They're developing task automations that are going to be more day-to-day in a very customized way, rather than very broad-based for an enterprise. And in that nature, citizen developers are going to be developing attended automations. And they're going to be doing that using Studio X, which is going to be one of the products you guys will probably learn about in one of our other webinars. To build upon that, the next is going to be the automation expert. The automation expert is a bit more advanced than the citizen developer. However, they're not part of the true center of excellence. You can think of them more as a power user. They're, again, tech-savvy employees. They've gone through the citizen development curriculum, and they want to start building unattended automations as well, both for themselves and for their departments as a whole. And so they're going to be able to, again, build both. And to build upon that even further, again, someone more trained and more skilled, that's going to be your typical RPA developer. A lot of organizations start off with hiring RPA developers or training RPA developers. And these team members will be able to, again, also create both attended and unattended solutions. They typically start off with unattended, and we'll see why on the next slide. And the last persona is just in the control phase, right? The COE, they're centrally monitoring setting up frameworks to help with self-service of the automations, and they have a variety of tools at their disposal as well. Again, if you guys do have any questions, we do have a Q&A interface, so feel free to type your questions in there, and I'll answer them when we have time. But step 2, moving on, is to ultimately identify the quick wins. And so this is where, if you have an automation idea, the ones that will give you the most ROI for your organization, especially if you're brand new to automation, is going to be those processes that fall into these 8 categories. The first is going to be those with standard readable electronic input types. This means that it's going to be a bit more, the idea is we want our processes to be as rules-based as possible. And by having standard readable electronic input, it's very easy to have reliable, clean data that I can start with. The next thing is going to be highly manual and repetitive processes. This allows me to get more bang for my buck, right? I have a single process, and if I'm executing it at a higher frequency, it's going to be providing more value than a different process that executes at a lower frequency. Next is all processes. They're going to have business exceptions. They're going to have different variations or pathways or logic trees that a specific transaction can follow. The best processes are going to be those that have a lower exception rate. That means it's less time for the developer to define all of those different logic pathways, and ultimately, again, faster time to value. Rules-based processes, I covered this already. More rules-based it is, the easier it is to kind of tell the robot and teach the robot exactly what you want it to do. You don't have to have it making complex decisions. High volume, low complexity, stable processes that aren't changing. Processes performed by large teams, that means they're most likely highly manual and repetitive. And mature swivel chair processes. And so that means that you can basically easily train a new employee on that process. That's kind of what we're doing here when we're developing the automation. You're training now a digital worker and telling them exactly what to do. Even the developer, if they're not an SME, it's kind of like you have to train the developer what the process is and teach them in order to be able to have them teach the robot as well. But these quick wins, they ultimately result in perfect candidates for unattended automations. And that's why this is the #1 automation scenario that most organizations start with. And so let's go ahead and see one of these in action. This is going to be a invoice process. Robots are able to extract data from different document types. We have a document understanding solution where you can use either machine learning or form-based extraction. But here, this is where the quintessential of what an unattended robot does. It enters data into applications, and that SAP screen came on really quick, but it can also send email invoices as well for the results. Let me go ahead and play another video to kind of just show you this a bit more on a larger end-to-end process. One of the main questions we get is, hey, can a robot work with multiple different applications? And so this is one of my favorite videos to show. It's an interoperability demo. So what we'll see the robot do is interact with all 8 of these different applications. And so let's go ahead and see it in action. So the data in this process is going to be coming from Excel. Data can ultimately come from any application or any location. But we're going to now see the robot open up all of the different applications that it's going to engage with. And now it's going to start with a legacy terminal green screen application. It's going to do a couple keystrokes, take the data from the Excel and email and enter it into Salesforce, verify that that person exists in Salesforce before opening a custom expense application, filling out an expense report, entering it into a Word template, saving the Word template as a PDF and entering it in, sending it via email, and then completing by entering that data into SAP. On the second transaction, what we'll see here is robots are also able to handle business exceptions. This user didn't exist in Salesforce, and so the robot's going to basically create that user in Salesforce, again, following that different logic pathway in order to be able to still successfully complete that end-to-end process. At the very end of an unattended automation, the main thing that we want to communicate to the automation user, right, the end user getting value from the automation, is what exactly did the robot complete. Creating an audit trail is going to be really important. And so you want to build that into your unattended workflows. But this is what we see here. So the robot went ahead and updated the Excel at the very end and with exactly what it did. The other cool thing about our robots is they can engage both with applications via the user interface, which is what you saw for the majority of that demo video. But the second is they can also interact via API. And so you didn't actually see it open Outlook or Office 365 or save the Word file as a PDF. That's because all of that happened behind the scenes. And so while you're thinking about unattended automations, remember all of them are happening in a back office somewhere. And so it's a very minimal amount of engagement that you might have with them. And so step 3, right, is start scaling and start building more of an intake methodology. Because while the initial automations you might come up with are unattended in nature, you might start getting a lot of attended or very similar processes that are going to be more user focused rather than transactional focused. And that's also at scale can provide value for your organizations. And so this is the framework that we typically follow. Users are going to submit ideas, share ideas, and through Automation Hub and any other tools you might use, they're going to go through, again, an evaluation that's going to walk through each of those 8 scenarios I mentioned before. So classifying those as looking at the value of the automation, the complexity of the automation, the scope, prioritizing it, and classifying it as a good candidate or not is going to be really important. And that allows us to then break these into all of those different scenarios or personas that we talked about before. The high complexity, high value tasks, those are probably going to be implemented by strategic partners like an Accelirate. They're going to be a larger effort, but they have a very strong ROI, and they can incorporate more complex components like AI Center or document understanding because they're being implemented by a partner who has the skill set in that. As we start looking more at attended automation, yes, you can have the COE develop an attended automation and deploy it to the entire organization. But the more medium and lower levels, this is where you can redirect the development effort to those power users and to those citizen developers. And again, the more the lower skill set, the more likely it's going to be attended automation. But really, this is not a golden rule by any means, just more of a starting place. For most of our key accounts today, we're actually seeing a hybrid model. Our citizen developers are more interested in getting more trained and skilled at
creating unattended automations, and vice versa. The COE is getting more comfortable creating company-wide attended automations as well. And so let's go ahead and take a look at the human in the loop scenario that that Robert had mentioned before I move on to attended automation. So this is the guide that I had shared in the chat. Hopefully you were able to download it. The interoperability process we saw earlier was fully unattended. Partially unattended, this might be a scenario where I, as a human, might develop and modify that input Excel file and prepare it for the user. And automation model 3 is going to be the human in the loop scenario. Previously on this video, I had showed you a robot downloading an invoice. Let's say for any reason, when I'm trying to extract data from the invoice, it's unable to get the invoice number, or it gets it with a low confidence score. Or another scenario is maybe the value is 6,600 and I have to get human approval for any invoice over 6,000. This is where the unattended robot can bring a human in the loop, and how that would work is it would actually pause its workflow and send a notification to a human user. And while it's paused, the unattended robot could go do something else. But this is where Action Center becomes very valuable. And Action Center is going to be a user interface that here are all of the different actions that I have assigned or pending to me. And you can create a custom user interface. And this could be whatever you want. The one I have here is a pre-built one we have for our document understanding solutions. And so here, the robot tells me, this is the document that I'm trying to extract data from. These are the fields I'm looking for, and these are the confidence scores and what I think it is. Go ahead and please validate these for me. Again, look using your eyes, and help me continue to train and be more aware of what I need to do in the future. And so this is kind of a great example of that. Some other scenarios where human in the loop might come critical is things like CAPTCHA, or anytime a website has proved you're not a robot. In those scenarios, you are required kind of by legal and ethics, right, to have a human do at least that step. Typically, it's a login step. And so in those scenarios, that's where a human or a robot can capture that CAPTCHA or capture whatever it is, tell you what it thinks it is, but then create a task for that two-factor authentication before proceeding. And so this is an example of just a text verification that was done, but there's a couple different things that you can build, and you can, as you can see, it's a custom form that I was able to create. Awesome. So that about covers it for unattended automations. Let's go ahead and take a look at an attended automation, maybe a citizen developed one that I built, or it could be citizen developed or developed by the COE. But this is where attended users might have that robot tray, and the automation will run from that tray, but then again, we can engage with the robot via these forms that are open directly on my machine. And so here we see the attended user, in order to prepare that data for the robot, it's getting information. Please select a person. This drop-down list was populated by the robot, maybe making a database call or making an API call. And I, as a human user, am going to, schedule a reference check for a specific person. And then the robot's going to go ahead and schedule that meeting and send out the invoice for me, or send out the meeting invite for me. In addition, let's say I'm actually on a call for an interview. I can run an automation to prep my screen. And so this is more of that tandem scenario that Robert mentioned. While I'm actually engaged with the interviewee or the candidate, I'm able to take notes and see exactly what's been done, have everything open for me, start my day, and then not have to worry about actually doing the administrative work after the call. I can do it in real time, and have the robot complete the rest for me. And so to assist with this, what our team has done is actually helped organizations by creating a bundle of pre-built automations that organizations can deploy directly into users' UiPath assistants. That really helps an organization because now you don't have to purchase attended robot licenses for a large team and then develop something. You can launch them, get the value from day one, and continue to evangelize automation. And so if you guys weren't aware, UiPath has a marketplace. In this marketplace, you can find different pre-built custom activities, snippets, templates, and tools or solutions. But this bundle here is composed of about, I think, 11 right now, and it continuing to scale, of pre-built automations that you can basically download and get ready to go and, again, provide value. So what are different ways that attended automation can provide value? We've categorized them into 4 different universal automation themes. And this, again, helps you, it's all focused on scaling and getting more value from your organization. If you're thinking about ROI, unattended automations are going to, it's going to be like a bell curve like this, where unattended automations are going to be high ROI, be lower in quantity, but provide a lot higher value. And attended automations are going to be less valuable, but at scale, because they have that lower ROI, if it saves an individual 15 minutes, multiply that by 1,000 or 2,000 employees, I all of a sudden have as much ROI as that single unattended automation. And so the themes that we see here are third-party license replacements. With UiPath, you can build applications. You can build different user interfaces. And if you can build an application that replaces something else that you spend licenses on, that allows you to not only increase the amount of customization you can do on your own application, it allows you to ultimately eliminate that third-party licensing cost. And so license reduction is a huge ROI or value proposition that is provided with automation. Kind of along the same lines, common application utilities. Think flashcards or snippet tools, or easily copying and pasting data from a PDF that is a scanned PDF and not like a native text PDF where you need to OCR something. This allows you to, again, set up different keystrokes in your assistant and hotkeys and get those set up right away. Productivity tools, and then our platform, we mentioned there's a lot of different approaches you can take towards automation. Attended automations can also provide value in other parts of our platform. As an example, let's say an automation has 30% business exceptions. Every time a business exception occurs, you can maybe automate the middle 3 steps of it, but you still need a robot on, or you still need a human on the first 2 and last 3 steps. That's a perfect candidate for attended automation because the business exception is being handled on the user's computer, but it can be again that hybrid model of attended automations used to solve a unattended business exception. And again, I know there's a lot of words being thrown around there, so if you're getting confused, I'm a very visual learner. Definitely encourage you guys to download that e-guide and see the different process flows that Robert had walked through before. See, there's a Q&A. Yeah, so Deborah asked a great question. Aren't you replacing the license with a UiPath attended automation license? And the answer is yes, but if I could replace 15 different applications with a single license, I would gladly make that switch. And that's kind of, again, the value proposition. The reason I'm showing you all 4 of these different themes is because you can't think of it as just, hey, I'm purchasing a UiPath attended robot to do one thing. It really is a enterprise-wide digital transformation, that automation first mindset, what are all of the different areas where I can use this single license that I'm purchasing, and where can it provide additional value? And so this is a great one. This is our universal autocomplete. And so again, this deck will be shared after the call. You can watch this demo video with the narration behind it. But basically, the idea here is if you're doing emails, or each organization even has, different lingo or language that they like using. If you want to standardize different responses or things like that, the universal autocomplete functionality allows you to do that. You can set up different keystrokes for individual users and automatically have a specific response be set up. And so if you're completing reports or sending out a large amount of emails, this autocomplete functionality can really help you build those emails. And there are a couple, again, third-party tools that do this exact same thing, but replacing it with this along with a couple other third-party licenses, that's again the value that you would get from something like an autocomplete functionality. The next is a productivity tool. So this is just a basic image compressor. Again, this could be a tool, most likely a free tool I download from somewhere or I have something for, but with UiPath, I can just have it available in my tray and quickly compress images without having to go to all those different websites. Again, the idea here is for something like image compression, go ahead and save a minute of your day. If you have a job where you're compressing images all the time, this again will save you at minimum 365 or let's say 142 minutes in your day, right? Schedule availability assistant. So common applications, things like Outlook or Zoom. If you need to quickly be able to identify calendar availability, this is something that you could do immediately while you're on a call or something along those lines. Hey, for everyone in this meeting, if we need to reschedule it, can you go ahead and tell me the next available calendar update? And so this is where you can make different API calls and it automatically tells you rather than you having to navigate the Outlook UI. And lastly, UiPath platform overlap. So this is where we have document data extraction. This is an unattended process. It has a couple of different things that it was flagged that these documents I need to do actually something for them. I can do that handoff easily from my machine to an unattended robot or something like that. And that's that hybrid model again coming into play. If I need to prepare data for an unattended robot and actually send it, I can have an unattended automation be prepped for me to format the data in the exact proper way that an unattended robot accepts the data. And again, accelerates time to value and reduces the number of errors that you might have. So before we go into the summary and QA, I know the last thing that this webinar was really trying to focus on is see and generate ideas of all of the different ways that you can use automation. I want to let you guys know that UiPath has developed a series of heat maps. Automation and RPA is really industry and work stream agnostic. And so regardless of what industry you have, banking and financial services, healthcare, insurance, manufacturing, public sector, or what domain you are within your organization, finance, human resources, IT, legal, marketing, UiPath has developed different heat maps that you can contact us or contact Accelirate, and we'll be able to happily be able to share with you those. These are very good for the next conversation starter on how you get started and move forward. And with that, let's go ahead and I'll pass it off back to you, Robert.
Thank you. Let me 1 second. Let me just pull this up. And really, the remaining time we spent that we have here, I wanted to just open the floor. We've had a couple of questions during during this, and I really appreciate the explanation, Vikram. That was a great walkthrough. One moment, trying to share my screen, but the remaining time here, unless there's anything, Ahmed, that you would like to add, I just want to open the floor to questions to see if anybody has anything that they would like to ask for any of us. So you can just put that in the chat, and then we can go ahead and just respond to some of those.
Sure. So I think this was a great overview of the different types. As you can tell from what Vikram and Robert just talked about, there are multiple scenarios, multiple types of options you have. With all these options, it's interesting to keep in mind that, and it's interesting that we call it traditional and legacy, but the traditional questions or the traditional metrics, questions with which you determined whether a process was good for automation, sort of don't always apply. So for example, it used to be that if you asked anyone what's good for RPA, they would say it starts with structured data. It has very objective rules that can be determined from the structured data that you start with in the input, and so on and so forth, and then a defined set of actions that you can take afterwards. With these different paradigms of robots, you can now say, okay, if I have a subjective decision in between, I can actually insert a human in between. If there are not structured inputs that I can start with, there are apps and Action Center that I can use to start the automation without a structured input Excel spreadsheet, right? So it's really interesting that how the industry has evolved, and how these paradigms have evolved to change really how you look at what is feasible for automation. And I'm sure Vikram, and we see it every day, Vikram, I'm sure you see that as well, that we go into quite a few places and they have that mindset of, oh, I can only start with an Excel spreadsheet and I can only do this process if everything is completely objective and there's a straightforward rule to determine what the next step is. Just keep that in mind, that that's not the case anymore, and you have options available to either kick off automations, do automations in front of users, do them unattended, and with I call it magic, the way UiPath does it. Put an item on it does it better than I do. I can't just put an item somewhere while I wait for somebody's answer and start back exactly where I left off, but it's actually pretty cool. The robot tells the human, I need your input on this, goes about, is free to do other things, and then it picks up exactly where it left off and goes on its merry way to finish the task. It's very cool.
Yeah, and I think the biggest question, if you're trying to understand what should I automate next, the biggest question you need to answer, or question you need to ask yourself is what are my pain points? And understanding those, that helps you then brainstorm solutions for them. As an example, I'm in pre-sales, right? Pre-sales is pretty dynamic in nature. I'm always having different customer conversations. And I need to be able to, it's very not rules-based, right? If you want to talk about attended automation, I have to pull my attended automation stuff. If I want to talk about healthcare attended automation, I have to do that, right? And so thinking about a pain like that of how do I make something very dynamic in nature that's not easily scalable if I add additional pre-sales representatives, how do I add a bit more structure to that? That's where UiPath Apps, I was able to build like a single pane of glass. And that's the single pane that now, regardless of what conversation we have, I can go have that conversation. And it's essentially, I'm building a brand new application for my team, but it's then powered by automations that I can run unattended administrative automations from, or attended automations on my machine to open up all the necessary things to have that live conversation in front of my customers.
Absolutely. I think one of the best ways I've been able to describe to prospects and customers about how to look for automations is not to ask what you want automated, but actually ask, what do you do on a daily basis? That question yields so many opportunities, more so than ever asking, what would you like automated? Because if you asked someone that, generally it's the one thing that they do once a month for 2 hours that they hate doing. Those are the opportunities you usually yield. But we really appreciate everyone showing today, coming to the webinar today. Vikram, it was a pleasure speaking with you. We really appreciate our partnership and look forward to speaking with you more. RJ, as Robert is lovingly known around Accelerate, thank you very much for explaining the different modes of running robots. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us, info@accelerate.com. Look us up on LinkedIn. We'll be sending out an email with a recording of this webinar for everyone who attended. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Vikram. Thank you, RJ.
Thank you very much.